All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Tech Exchange Seminar Series. My name is Ganga Setla. I'm the Associate Director of Community Engagement for the Institute for Artificial Intelligence and Data Science. The Tech Exchange Seminar Series is our effort to try to get uh, uh, any activity that's going on in the AI space at UB to be familiar to uh, people across the entire campus. There is a lot of activity going on, and typically we tend not to hear about it. And so, this is an opportunity for faculty to make their research efforts known to the wider community. And we have uh, IAD allows like amplification of your research. We have extensive mailing lists and social media channels where we can post about this. The talks here are recorded and are available to share after the talk. So this is a useful way in which you can try to find, especially uh, younger researchers, to find collaborators, and also we've had some success stories of people managing to forge relationships and find research partners. So that is the uh, main purpose of this Tech Exchange seminar series. And today we have two exciting talks. The first talk is by Professor Varun Chandola from the computer science department, and he's just returned from the National Science Foundation after serving as a program director in the Science Directorate and National AI Research Resource infrastructure that NSF created, and the program that NSF has created was part of the many responsibilities that Varun had at NSF, and so he. It would be very useful to the university community to hear from him about the purpose and the resources that are available through the National AI Research Resource. And he'll be followed by Professor Janko talking about work that he's doing in the area of network spatial statistics and climate change and health. I'll have both speakers add anything additional that they want to sort of say about themselves before they talk. Varun, you can take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranga. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here. And I'm assuming there are people on Zoom as well. So hello to you all. So I'm going to start off today's set of lectures and then talks, and then Mark is going to come up in half an hour. And I'm going to make sure that I keep on time. So as Ranga said, I'm a faculty here in computer science department. I work in the area of data mining, machine learning, and I collaborate with many people across the campus. Over the last 4 years, I was at NSF, National Science Foundation. I was a program director there. And as and essentially what I'm going to talk here is some of the things that I thought would be useful for the community of AI researchers here at UB. So this is not going to be a research talk. I'm not going to talk about my research, but more of information session about this resource that is available. I will also point to some other resources that might be available to you all, right? So the resource that I'm going to talk about, it's called National AI Research Resource, which you might or might not have heard of. So today I'm just going to introduce what it is and why it is important for all of us and how we can use that, right? So it essentially is think of it as a computing center where you can go and ask for resources. And I'm sure if you're in the field of AI, then you always come up against availability of resources, and that could include computing, that could also include data and other training and support as well. So all of this is available through NAIR for free, right? And it is also available to students directly, so you do not necessarily have to go through your advisor. So I'll go through the process. So there is a proposal sort of process where it's very lightweight. It's not writing a big NSF proposal. So it's not very hard to do, and you can get access to very unique set of resources for free. Of course, this is it's available to everyone. So there is a process through which they want to vet your application. So you want to make sure that when you request for those, you are asking the right questions and providing all the details so that you get accepted. So I'll sort of go through that as well. But these slides will be hopefully made available to you all. So if you want to come back to those, you can always refer to those. And I'm here, so if you have questions, please feel free to ask me. All right. So just to tell you about what this AI research resource is. So this is a resource that is envisioned to be available to the entire country. And I'll give you a little bit of history, but the idea is that as AI sort of becomes, or it has already become very important and transformative, and everyone is using it, and everyone is conducting research in it, and using it for education or incorporating it in their educational curriculum, there is a dire need for the right resources so that you can do it, right? So if you go to a very big university, even at UB, we do have access to a lot of these systems, which is great. But if you go to a small college or a small university, or even in a large university, if you go to a small group, sometimes they are challenged to find the right things to use, right? And as you probably all know, AI is very resource intensive, very resource hungry. So that was sort of the motivation behind this research resource. So it is aimed to be this nationally available resource. And the idea is so that it will promote US competitiveness in AI, and also allow universities and schools to train the workforce that is needed in the modern world, right? So the goal is to spur innovation, increase diversity of talent, improve US capacity, and advance the principles of trustworthy AI. And as I said, it's not just computing resources, so it's not just access to a supercomputer, but it is also access to high quality data sets, catalogs of test beds and educational materials, and then also training and user support, which is all important when you start using these systems. So just to give you a bit of a history, so this all started almost 6 years back, 2019. In the previous Trump administration, there was a presidential executive order that outlined the need for investment in the field of AI to ensure that US stays at the forefront of AI innovation, right? And that led to within that executive order, they also mentioned the need for a resource like this. And I don't know if they called it a national AI research resource, but anyway, this led to setting up of a task force, a federal task force, which was led by Lynn Parker from Tennessee, and Manish Parashar, who was our division director at NSF. And the idea there was to sort of get together experts and plan out what this resource would look like, right? So this document that you see here got published in 2023, so you can take a look at that as well. But that led to the next executive order. This was in the Biden administration, where they essentially outlined what should be the next steps for the federal government to ensure safe, secure, and trustworthy AI. This got rescinded this year. But anyway, within that, they also laid out this or they tasked NSF and other federal agencies to create a pilot version of NAIR, right? So that led to the creation of NAIR pilot. So if you want to know more about NAIR and everything that I'll talk about NAIR as well, you can go to this website, nairpilot.org, and it has all the details. And I'll go to that website, or I'll just maybe just point to that to ensure that you know where it is, right? And so everything that I'll talk about, it's there. And you can take a look at that, right? So this got created in early 2024, and it's been running since. And then, but as you can see from the name, it's pilot, right? So that was just a sort of a small-scale venture. And right now, it is still a small-scale venture. But even within that, there are a lot of resources that you can get access to. However, a few months ago, the new administration also put out another executive order called America's AI Action Plan. And within that, I'm happy to say that they also identified the need for a full resource like this. So hopefully in the coming years, we'll have more resources available for free for the researchers in the country. But today, what I'm going to talk about is how can you get access to the near pilot resources, right? And what is the process for that? Just last month there's a call out which essentially shows how NSF is acting on the directives of the current administration, and now they are trying to put together this full NAIR. So hopefully, in coming years, we'll have more of that. But essentially, what NAIR allows you to do is to submit proposals to request for resources, right? So let's say you are trying to do, you're building or training a large language model, and you need access to a bunch of H100 GPUs, right? Obviously, as you might already know, those are hard to come by. But through NAIR, you can get access to machines that have quite a few of those resources, and you essentially get an allocation on that, and you can submit your job and then get your results back. So it's not like a machine that you can own, but it's more of sort of like going to Amazon Web Services or Azure. Same way you can get to those services through this, right? So these are some examples on the screen of what has been funded so far. And the reason I put it here up front is because this tells you the breadth of activities that are currently being supported. So it's not focused on one discipline or one area of research or one topic, right? So it's anything that either needs AI resources or it's doing research in AI to promote AI, right? So you can see some examples where people have requested resources to just run a course, right? A course where they are teaching AI and they need access to GPU resources. Same way, there have been teams that have requested resources to just run a high school course or a high school summer program, and they can get access to. And again, it's not, as I said, just machines, right? You can also get access to pre-trained AI models. So one of the resource providers in NAIR is, well, there are many resource providers. So one of them is OpenAI, and OpenAI provides access to their GPT-4 and the latest models, and they give API credits to you, right? So instead of you paying for those, you can get access to those through this. And then there have also been traditional AI sort of requests or model requests or traditional resource requests to run advanced simulations with AI and doing wildlife monitoring. So different kinds of things, right? Some that requires running very large training jobs, some that require just running very light jobs, but for a longer time. So anything is possible through NAIR. So if you get a chance, the website that I showed before, you can go there and you can see the list of available resources. And unfortunately, I didn't catalog it here. I thought I'll have my laptop, but that's fine. So if you go to that website, right, there is a tab up top which says current opportunities, and there you can request through different channels. As you see here, you can request for you can request resources. Does this work? Anyway, you can request resources for research. You can request resources for education. Let's say you're running a class. You can also request small resource just to get started. So that's what they call a startup project. You can also request deep partnerships. So let's say you want to do something which requires engagement with with Microsoft's ML team or OpenAI's model team, right? So you can have those kind of things as well. And you can also get access to a lot of data sets. Now, the data sets are nothing new here. Those are just a collection of data sets that were already out there. And slowly they are adding more data sets to it. So this is a good one place shop, maybe one shop stop to get access to these data sets. But that's not, I'm assuming in the future this will become much more, richer in terms of the data they have. But the other things are unique. So that's so you can go to these. So essentially, when you click on any of these links, it will take you to a request page where you have to write a small proposal, and it's very light. So you have to describe what you're doing and what kind of resources you need, and then just submit it. And usually, if you are a student, then I think they require you to add a letter from your advisor, just to make sure that you are doing something that's part of your research. Uh, and if you're a faculty or otherwise researcher, then you can just go ahead and submit these. And then there are some restrictions that I'll come to in a little bit. So these are the different. When you go up there, right, in the thing, it will ask you to identify what resources you need, and there you can see different types. And I'll first ask you to focus on the left-hand side. These are the different categories in which the resources are available. The top is federal agency systems. So these are the big supercomputers that NSF and Department of Energy have, invested in for many years, right? So there are, if you look at some of the DOE labs, they have the world's fastest supercomputers. We also have NSF-funded systems. Many of them are focused on running AI applications. So, for example, there's a system called Delta AI at Illinois, which has a very large number of latest GPU nodes. And many others are the same way, right? So you can select what you need, right? And then you can also select from some private sector computational resources. So you can get access to AWS credits, you can get access to Azure credits, or even NVIDIA's the DGX cloud, right? You can also get access to some vertical platforms like Databricks and others that are down there. You can get access to model APIs through credits like OpenAI, and I think Anthropic is in there as well. So all big players in AI are in there, and they have they are essentially providing this for free through NAIR. So please take a look at this. I'm sure you'll find this useful, and it'll help your research or education activities as well. And then there are some other more uh, different kinds of resources as well. For example, Luther AI is a non-profit. I don't know where they're based, but they have a lot of expertise in training large language models on these supercomputing systems, not systems that were made for those kind of activities, but traditional multi-cluster systems. So they are offering collaborative experience, so you can work with their engineers and build something if you need. So one thing that you'll also notice is the eligibility. So this is important since this is a resource that is made available by the U.S. federal government. It means that it is restricted to US-based researchers and educators. So when you put in a proposal, you have to indicate that you are part of a US-based education organization. You do not have to be a US citizen, but just you have to be part of it. So anyone at UB, of course, will be eligible, right? The other thing is, this one is for the educational activities. So let me go back maybe. So here on the right, you can write a proposal to get access to research resources, and you can get access to educational resources, and they're both same, except that it's what you're trying to do with it, right? So if you're trying to put in an education proposal, then you have to show that you are conducting teaching or education or training sessions for US-based students, right? And as it says here, courses and training sessions must not allow participants who are not US-based. So that's the only restriction. And then what is the process, right? How do you get this? So what you do is you go to one of those links. Let's say you are a researcher and you want access to NVIDIA's DGX cloud. So what you do is you go to that link, you put in a proposal, you describe what you want to do, right? And you have to show that what you're doing will advance research using AI, or it will advance AI research. So either of the two. Or if you're doing education, then you have to show that you're using AI to educate students, or you are educating students in AI. The proposal is short. Once you submit it, which is like less than 3 pages of worth of writing, not too much, Then this gets submitted and gets reviewed, right? And again, it is free resource, but they will still review it to make sure that there is scientific merit in there and you are eligible to receive the resources. And it takes roughly a month. These days, they have been lagging a little bit just because of too much, you know, too much workload, but they're trying to figure that out. But essentially, I think the expectation is that within a month you'll hear back from them. Usually they sort of wait until 15th of a month. So today is what, 21st. So let's say you put in a proposal now, you will wait until they will wait until the 15th of November and then collect all the proposals that they have received, and then they'll review it, and then they'll get back to you, right? Sometimes they might sort of iterate with you. So they might say, maybe this is, you're asking for this, but this might be a more suitable resource, because they're also trying to load balance. So they cannot just have everyone asking for, let's say, OpenAI credits, right? So sometimes they say, oh, maybe you can get access to, instead of going directly to OpenAI, that you can go through Azure or something like that, right? So there will be a chance for you to work with them. But there's a committee, right, and which includes representatives from every resource providers, and then they'll look at your proposals, and then they will determine if this is a proposal that should be funded or not. And usually, as I said, they will look at what is the merit of your proposal, and also how good is the fit, right? Especially with private organizations. So let's say when we work with OpenAI, they have a representative and they want to fund certain types of proposals. So not everything is very clear cut in that way. Usually, if you want access to the federally funded systems, the process is a little more transparent, because everything is sort of out there. But with private entities, there's always a little bit of haziness. But anyway, you will sort of get a notification within 3 months, and once you get a notification, then essentially you can start onboarding, right? So let's say you wrote a proposal for access to the Jetstream system in Indiana. So once you get it funded, then the Jetstream team, which is a sort of a supercomputer based at Indiana University, they will work with you and they'll say, okay, this is how you create an account, this is how you'll run your systems, right? And then, of course, since this is a funded activity, which means that NSF expects that you will provide progress reports. So it's not like you get access to a system and then that's it, right? So there will be a little bit of a expectation that you are using it in the right way. So that's sort of the quick overview of how the allocation process works. As I said, there are some eligibility requirements which you can look at the proposal call, and they'll go over it in more detail. But the highlights are that, as I said, whatever you're asking to do or whatever you're proposing to do should have an AI component in some way. So you have to make that clear. As I said, all investigators have to be part of an organization that is US based. So that's important. And then there are some other things that you can take a look. All right, so that's, as I said, there are two types of broad calls for research resources and education resources. They are kind of similar in the sense that you can get access to the same kind of resources. The only difference is that you have to provide different kinds of justification. So that's something you can take a look. How much time? I don't have too much time. So I'll just quickly maybe talk about what kind of research areas do they want to focus on. Of course, this is very broad, right? So they're not, as I said, limited to any one area, but they do want whatever you propose to have one or more of these aspects, right? So either you're developing new methods, or you're using AI methods to conduct some scientific investigation in your own discipline, right? So any of those two, and maybe you're using AI for processing experimental data, right? So it doesn't have to be computer science, and it doesn't have to be purely a particular scientific area. It can be combination of them as well. And in fact, they do prefer a lot of collaboration and multidisciplinary research. So, and in terms of the domain, they're all over, across. but you do want to be careful about making sure that whatever you're doing is aligned with the federal priority area. So that's one thing that's not very cleanly expressed here, but sometimes some proposals do get rejected because the type of thing that they want to investigate is not quite what the current um, guidelines sort of mention. All right, another thing, good way to understand how things are working out in NAIR is going back to that website. So this is the last thing I'll say. If you go back to that website, there is a link on top which lists all the current awards. And that's also a very good way to see what have they funded, right? So you go to that list, you'll see all the projects that they have funded. And then they have some, if you click on the abstract, it also gives you a brief description of what they are doing. So that gives you a sense of, okay, what kind of projects did they fund? And then on top of abstract is another drop-down thing for resources. So that tells you what resources they got. So they got access to GPU resources and so on. So if you see a project here that kind of matches with what you want to do, that would be helpful because then you can see, okay, what kind of resources were they able to get, right? So I think that's primarily it. Again, I will encourage you to take a look at all that website and go through the proposal process. And if you have any questions, of course, you can reach out to me. They also have links there where you can submit a ticket and ask questions before you submit. And then there's also a lot of support available after you get awarded. So once you get access to a system, that's one thing, right? But then how do you use it in the best way? That's also important, and that's all the help is available through NAIR. And as I said, this is going to become bigger in future, but it will be great if you can get engaged right now and make use of those resources. And before I end, I also want to just mention that besides NAIR, I'm sorry, there's too much detail, but this will be helpful for you for later. But besides NAIR itself, there are many other federally funded resources that are available to you. So as a student or a researcher, you should not feel limited by what is available at UB. You can go to these other things. For example, there is a program that NSF funds called Access. And through that, just like NAIR, you can get access to very large computing systems. You can get time on those. So that is something that you can also take a look. And in fact, NAIR is very heavily subscribed because a lot of people want to use it. But this program, Access, that has many more resources, and I would say it's less subscribed than NAIR. So please take a look at that too. So it's accessci.org. So if you go to that, and through that you can go there. So I have a student, Dwyer, who works in sort of understanding the mixture of expert models for Bayesian neural networks. And he didn't go through NAIR, he went through Access. He got access to that Delta AI system, and he was able to run really large training jobs through that. He got access to a lot of the GPU resources that were there. So another thing to be aware of, and you should, again, it's free, and students can write a proposal for that as well. All right, so I will end here and just see if there are any questions. But again, as I said, if you have more questions in the future, feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to help you. Thank you all.
Thanks, Varun. Let's thank the speaker. These folks in the room can give him a round of applause. And while we sort of switch over to Mark, maybe you can take a couple of questions. People online can unmute themselves and ask a question. People in the audience there, please feel free to ask if you have any questions for Varun. Yeah, I'm currently here in DC for the NSF, the Summit for AI Institutes Leadership, and I think NSF wants researchers to use all these resources and encourages the effort that they're putting to make these resources available. So, any questions for Varun? If not, Mark, you can take it away.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, I can hear myself. Okay, cool. All right, well, thanks to Varun for kicking us off, and thanks for having me. I'm new here. I started in July. I'm an assistant professor of epidemiology and environmental health, and I'm also kind of a core faculty of the new Center for Climate Change and Health Equity. So I'm not going to be talking about any math or machine learning or AI models or anything like that. I'm mostly taking the opportunity here to kind of introduce myself and try and walk you through some of the things that I'm working on so that hopefully you can imagine where machine learning, AI, statistics, whatever might come into play. And I'll touch a little bit on where I'm working in these spaces as we go. So basically, I've just titled my talk an overview of things that I'm working on or thinking about. So I'll start out with just a bit of my background, who I am, where I came from, and then I just kind of want to highlight, three examples of questions that I'm asking or projects that I have that I'm working on. And those are across the areas of networks or network science, spatial statistics, and climate change and health. And climate change and health really kind of undergirds everything that I'm working on these days. So to start out, a bit about me. So I'm a geographer and a biostatistician by training. In geography, I'm in a subfield called population health geography, medical geography. It's had a lot of names over the years. But one of the core questions that geographers ask is how humans interact with the environment. And since I focus on health questions, most of those questions that I focus on are related to how do humans interact with the environment and how do those interactions give rise to disease risk. I spend most of my time working on malaria. So how do these interactions influence malaria risk? But I'm also a statistician. And so when I think about these human environment interactions, I'm often thinking about processes that evolve over space and through time. And so that's kind of led me to down the road of being a Bayesian and focusing mostly on hierarchical Bayes and spatial and spatiotemporal modeling, and then kind of moving into the network modeling space as well. I mentioned I work mostly on malaria. It's not all that I work on, but I mostly have focused on malaria over the last 10 or 15 years. And the reason for that is because about 3 billion people, mostly across tropical ecosystems, are at risk for malaria at any given time. 250 million people become infected every year, and about 600,000 of those people die. So it's a big deal, right? So it's a big public health problem, big global health problem. And so that's principally why I work on it. I work on it mostly in the Amazon and the Congo basins. So they have particularly high burdens of malaria, particularly in the Congo basin. And for the last 10 or 15 years, this is where most of my field work has been, where most of my research productivity has been. But in recent years, I've also been branching out to studying other infectious diseases and emerging infectious diseases at kind of the human-animal interface in Northeast Madagascar, and tropical environments there. And then if any of you have been paying attention over the last 5 years to kind of this migration crisis through the Darien Gap, I have a study where we're studying the effects of mass migration through the Darien Gap on changes in malaria transmission dynamics. So far this might not sound very AI or machine learning, but hopefully you can kind of get a sense of the sorts of data that I work with. So environmental data, human data, how humans interact with the environment, and so on and so forth. Animal data for spillover of pandemics and stuff like that. But failing that, as a geographer and a statistician, one of the ways I like to think of myself is a statistician who does field work. Okay. So kind of digging into some of the examples, I kind of want to motivate why I started moving into network science and thinking about networks and network analysis and network data. And one of the ways that humans interact with the environment is by moving through it. And that being said, we actually generally have a pretty poor understanding of mobility patterns and why people move and where they move to and when they move, particularly in the places where I work. So in the Congo Basin, in the rural Amazon, in the middle of the jungle in Panama and in Northeast Madagascar. But movement is driven by a number of factors. So you probably didn't spend the night here. You came here for some reason. You had a class. You wanted to see this talk. You have to teach. whatever reason, you came here from where you were last night, and there were reasons for that. And so a lot of common reasons where I work are to buy and sell goods, to seek healthcare, to attend religious services, social activities such as playing soccer. That's actually a major driver of mobility in much of the Amazon, as is religion, taking children to school, etc. But we generally don't observe those reasons for movement, right? And so we might imagine ourselves saying like, well, if we don't observe the reasons why people are moving, or we don't observe the patterns, we might be thinking about turning to AI to try and, learn from whatever data we do have available. Just to kind of further this example and to kind of hopefully drive home the notion of networks. In the places where I work, people often lack access to the formal financial sector, right? So there's not a bank account that you can log into. There's not even a building that you can go to deposit money. And so what that basically means is that people find themselves at financial risk, right? If whatever cash you have burns up, you're in trouble. You don't actually have a bank account where you can deposit money. And so a lot of your wealth is stored, say, in the livestock that you own or in the crops that you grow or the land that you own, etc. And one of the ways that people mitigate their financial risk in the settings where I work is they'll travel kind of among networks of communities where they have family, where they have friends, where they have other professional ties. And so this kind of gives rise to, if you can imagine just looking at a map of, say, the Amazon rainforest, and you see a bunch of dots that are communities, there's networks. In fact, there are many hidden networks that underlie how people move around those communities. And the goal is to try and figure out what they are. The other question is, I mentioned that this is a human-environment interaction. How does the environment shape mobility? Does anyone want to posit a guess? It's kind of obvious, but I don't think many people think about it. Maybe because it's too obvious. How many of you have decided to go into work later because the rain is going to stop? Or to work from home because the roads suck, right? Where I work, in the rural Amazon or the rural Congo, the only way to get around is by boat. And so the river level dramatically affects whether or not you can move. If it's too high, the landmarks that you have for where to turn right or where there's a sandbank or a log under the river, under the surface of the water is not visible to you. And if it's too low, your boat will hit the bottom. And so to illustrate this example, so this is work that I've been doing for a number of years now. So in 2022, I was doing field work in this small town, the small village of Islandia in Peru, which is on the border. It's on the Yavari River on the border between Peru and Brazil. And it's a town that is completely built on stilts. It is built on the Yavari River. Well, between 2023 and 2024, one of the worst droughts in the history of the Amazon occurred, and we're starting to come out of it. And you can see that the water's gone. How are these people going to move? It's going to be a lot harder. They're going to have to walk. And if you're thinking about, taking goods to sell, like crops that you grew, you have to carry them somehow because there are no trucks and there's no boat. And so this dramatically affects the way that we move. And so one of the big picture questions that I have is, how do human mobility and climate and environmental variability or climate or environmental change shape pathogen diffusion? In particular, like how do they shape malaria diffusion, for example? And we all kind of got a sense of this during COVID when there were lockdown orders where we can't move. And the understanding was like, if we move, we spread a disease. And so one of the ways that humans interact with the environment is by moving through it. As I mentioned, we kind of highlighted how climate environmental variability kind of shape that human movement. And combined, the hypothesis is that they shape the diffusion of malaria parasites or any infectious pathogen, for instance. And the basic idea that I have for this line of work is to try and understand how these pathogens are connected by looking at the genetic characteristics of the pathogens. So thinking about like genomic epidemiology, and we can think about bioinformatic pipelines that allow us to gain insights into that. But linking it with different types of human mobility. So if you're moving to buy or sell goods, if you're moving to take your kids to school, if you're moving to seek healthcare. But all of this is kind of a cartoon. as an example. And so I'm starting to unpack this in an NIH grant that I have called Effectively Linking Molecular Informatics and Network Analytics to Reduce Malaria. So this is kind of where the AI and the machine learning starts to come into place, if for no other reason that this particular RFA wasn't funding anything that wasn't in the area of data science. And so I figured if I put informatics and analytics in the title, I would stand a good chance, and it worked. But basically, this is the big picture of the grant, is trying to understand how these networks of communities lead to malaria diffusion, with the ultimate goal of understanding this so that we can, better prevent transmission, reduce transmission, and eventually eliminate the disease. How do we get the data, though? Everything that I've just described is well and good, but there's no data, as I mentioned at the very beginning. We don't have a good understanding of how, when, where, or why people are moving across the Amazon. And so this is where we do the exact opposite of AI. This is where we do respondent-driven sampling by boat in the jungle. And so it basically works as follows. All along the river system, and in my study area, it's the northern Amazon spanning Ecuador, Peru, and Brazil, down the Pastaza River, crossing the border from Ecuador into Peru, east-west along the Marañón River, and then picking up with the Amazon River and going into Brazil. And then the Yavari River is down here. Okay. So how do we collect these data? Well, there are hundreds of communities, maybe even thousands, across these rivers. Because to get around, you have to travel by boat, and so most all of the villages are on the rivers. So we're going to pick kind of in each river corridor along each side of the border, we're going to pick 10 initial node communities. And we're going to go to each of them, and we're going to ask 4 to 6 kind of key informants, people who are elders within the community, who know its history and who know, who's going where and why and when. And we're going to ask them where people travel to, where people come from when they travel to that community, and why. Are they going to buy and sell goods? Are they coming to play soccer? Are they coming to for some religious ceremony or whatever? And then we're going to ask people the places, and then we're going to basically collect all of that data, and we're going to rank the connectivity. So we've asked about population flows, and we've done this survey. It takes 20 minutes, and then we say, okay, the key informants named 10 or so communities. And these are the ones that they're most connected to, either overall or for a specific reason. We hop on a boat, we go to that community, or those 2 or 3 communities, and we do the exact same thing again. So if the initial node is like a wave 1 community, then the follow-up is a wave 2, and then you do that across 3 waves. And does anyone have a sense of why you do it for 3 waves only? That's when you run out of money. But realistically, we actually kind of have some confidence that we end up uncovering the whole network. But before we get on the boat, I mentioned on the left-hand side of that kind of cartoon equation is pathogen connectivity based on its genomics. So we partner with health workers, and we say when a febrile patient comes to this health facility and you're going to test them for malaria or any other pathogen, take a blood spot for us and save it, and then ship it to me or to some of our partners in Brazil or Peru or Ecuador, and we're going to sequence the genome. We're going to use amplicon sequencing to figure out what type of malaria parasite it is and how that malaria parasite is connected to all of these other malaria parasites, and think of that as a function of human connectivity. So we've collected almost all of the social network data. The red on that graph is the Marañón River. We're going to go collect those network data next year as part of my grant. We already have it along the 2 blue rivers, or 2 or 3 blue rivers up there. And this is just showing an example of how people are connected to one another. So there are 4 different ways that I'm showing that people travel. One is to buy and sell goods, to fish, social activities like playing soccer, and visiting family. And we can see that people who are fishing in the top right don't travel as far. So this is the survey data across Ecuador and Peru. But buying and selling goods across Ecuador and Peru, people travel a lot further. Same for social activities and visiting families. And then on the left-hand side here, we're just looking at okay, well, how related are some of these parasite populations between these communities or within these communities? And so basically, the goal, once all of the data are collected, is to start fitting, network models. So network autocorrelation models, where we can express pathogen genomic connectivity as a function of human connectivity or human mobility for a variety of different reasons. And I mentioned, that's kind of one of the things that we're planning to do. But there are many other things that we can do. So like non-parametric Bayesian methods to assess subpopulation structure of malaria parasites, lots of agent-based modeling that can be done. Neural networks and other machine learning and AI tools. And I don't have an exhaustive list here, but I imagine, if anyone who's working in the machine learning or AI space has been thinking about networks, either because it's in the name of the tool that they're using, or, they're used to doing clustering of some kind, dimension reduction, et cetera, all of which are relevant to answering questions like this. So this is an NIH grant. I was faculty at Duke before I came here. And so I actually have another internal grant at Duke, and I'm spending Duke's money from here. And that's called Linking Environments and Markets to Understand Regional Spread of Infections Along Networks in Madagascar, or lemurs in Madagascar. And it's basically doing the same kind of thing, but some of our survey work has identified that one of the primary ways that people adapt to climate change in rural Madagascar is by selling livestock. And that gets back to this notion of like, if you don't have access to a formal financial system, a lot of your wealth is stored in the assets that you own, like livestock. And if your crop is destroyed by a hurricane, or it isn't growing as much because there's less precipitation, your climate adaptation strategy might be to sell more livestock to like meet food and security needs, to meet income needs, and that can lead to human-animal pathogen spillover risk. Spillover from flu from a chicken into a human, et cetera. And so we're doing similar type of work. A lot of bioinformatics to be like, okay, did this flu virus is this shared between this human and their chicken, et cetera, and also thinking about how this might spread regionally in Madagascar. And then additionally, this project in the Darien on mass migration through the Darien Gap is something I'm actually a co-I on, but it's focusing on the role of mass migration and how it influenced malaria transmission in Panama. But again, using kind of genotyping, network modeling, as well as kind of some classic epidemiological study designs. Okay. So real briefly, since I got about 11 minutes left, I wanted to turn and talk about, spatial statistics. So the first was kind of like, all right, this is where I am in the network space, thinking about data collection and eventual, modeling and analysis. But I really started my career working on malaria in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So this is where I did my PhD. I set up a longitudinal study that's been going for over a decade now. And so this is kind of where I got my start. And one of the reasons why I'm focusing on malaria in the Democratic Republic of Congo is because it has a high burden of malaria. But malaria is also a disease in which human-environment interactions are really, really important. It's a vector-borne disease. You can't get it unless you're bit by a mosquito. And you have to be in the same place as the mosquito. They can't transmit it from afar. And one of the things that's well known in the literature for at least the last 15 years is that we really need a comprehensive understanding of the ecology of malaria, like how these micro-scale interactions between people and the environment and mosquitoes give rise to transmission. And agriculture is a fundamental way that humans interact with the environment. Growing food in a rural, rural village in the Congo or here in New York or anywhere is a fundamental way that we interact with the environment. In the DRC, over half the population lives in rural settings, and they are predominantly engaged in subsistence agriculture. And the reason why this is important from the perspective of malaria transmission is that it could be driving it, because engaging in rural kind of subsistence agriculture produces kind of sunlit pools of transient water, kind of like what you can see here in this little space. And that's actually the favored breeding habitat of Anopheles gambiae mosquitoes. So these are the mosquitoes that transmit malaria. And they're the most pernicious malaria vector in the world. At the same time, a third of the population in the Congo is infected with malaria, and that number has not changed in 20 years. So some colleagues have a population-based study of malaria prevalence that they do every 5 or 6 years, and the number's not changed, a third. despite like $100 million in malaria control investments. It's that bad. You spend $100 million and you don't move the needle. At the same time, a quarter of the population is experiencing acute hunger, so really significant food insecurity. Expanding agricultural production to address food insecurity, therefore, might contribute to malaria risk. In fact, one of the principal drivers of deforestation in the Congo Basin is smallholder farmers expanding their agricultural production to address acute food insecurity. But if doing that addresses their food insecurity, it very well may also increase their malaria risk. And so there's kind of this balancing act that you have to think about kind of in a decision-making perspective about forest conservation, food insecurity, malaria risk, etc. Okay, I'm not the only one who's worked on this, it turns out. There's been a lot of work from, entomologists, so people who study the mosquito vector, about, what kind of habitats they like. And there are these hypotheses that, as I said, if you expand agricultural production in the Congo, you're going to increase mosquito densities, you'll increase the number of mosquitoes, and therefore we can make the leap that you're going to increase malaria risk. But we don't actually observe that everywhere. We observe very heterogeneous effects, right? In some places, the risk goes up. In some places, the risk goes down. Varying as a function of study design, varying even if you have the same study design in two different places, you might find different things. And then just from an epidemiological perspective, a lot of these studies don't do a particularly good job of trying to understand or try and properly control for other factors that kind of govern your malaria risk. And a lot of these studies are done at a small number of sites. But the way that I kind of approached this problem was I imagine, like, what if every one of these studies was true? And the reason why I think about that is because mosquitoes adapt their behaviors to particular contexts. There are different species of mosquitoes in different places. So Anopheles gambii is not the only mosquito there. So they can also adapt their behavior, but they're also different species. And so what you might find locally is 100% true, but it's not true kind of nationally or at a population level. But nonetheless, we want to have a large number of sites where we study this and try and understand local effects so that we can guide control. And so this is kind of what led me to think about studying the relationship between agriculture and malaria, but imagining that that relationship varies over space, where it's not the same no matter where you are. This is, the only equation I think in the slide, but it's basically a hierarchical Bayesian, spatial model where the effect of agriculture on malaria risk is allowed to vary across the Democratic Republic of Congo as a function of space. It's basically just Gaussian process regression. If I want to sound machine learning or AI, I'll say like Bayesian kernel machine, depending on the audience, etc. But basically, it was trying to get at the idea that there very well is likely to be variability in the effect of agricultural expansion on malaria risk as a function of some of the things that I talked about. And we want to learn about those things so that we can, improve our response, as a malaria control program or a malaria control community. And it turns out that we actually do find variation in the relationship between agriculture and malaria risk. So red is really bad. So the kind of, if you imagine the map on the left, this is just a map of regression coefficients that, were learned from the statistical model. In the red areas, you have significantly elevated risk, or not necessarily statistically significantly, but meaningfully elevated risk relative to kind of the overall population average. And conversely, in blue, you have meaningfully decreased risk of transmission. So that's kind of where I got my start into, doing spatial statistics and developing expertise in that as part of my PhD. But one of the things that that led me to is thinking also about kind of improving response times to interventions. Like, is there going to be if there's an outbreak of malaria, how quickly can we go respond to it? And there's a lot of, kind of policy documents in the malaria world about how we need to do better with surveillance. But one of the things that I've been working on is trying to transform it from being reactive, which is kind of like, oh darn, there's been a malaria outbreak, we need to go control it, to imagining, well, what if we can predict it? And what if we can predict it 9 months in advance such that we can change the trajectory before before that outbreak happens. And so I'm a co-I on a NASA grant called Satellite Informed System and Tools to Guide Elimination of Malaria in the Americas, or SISTEMA. I came up with the name. And then another grant that I'm a co-I on, Improving Response to Malaria Outbreaks in Amazon Basin Countries, that I didn't come up with the name. And the basic idea here is to develop malaria early warning systems across the Amazon and Central America. And what we do is we work with a lot of climate scientists who are experts in hydrometeorological modeling. And we integrate real-time hydrometeorological monitoring tools and seasonal to subseasonal forecasts with real-time malaria surveillance data across 5 countries. In the Amazon, it's Brazil, Ecuador, and Peru. And in Central America right now, it is Honduras and Panama. And then we use ensemble modeling and using stacked generalization, which may be familiar to many of you, to forecast malaria incidence rates 12 to 36 weeks in advance at kind of programmatically relevant spatial scales. So whatever the spatial scale a given Ministry of Health wants us to work on. Also developed kind of these spatially varying interrupted time series models. So a lot of our collaborators in the Ministry of Health or malaria control programs kind of wanted to be like, yeah, we're intervening against malaria, but does it work? And by what magnitude are we reducing transmission, and can we attribute risk to specific interventions? So we've done a lot of modeling work in that space as well. And in the last 2 minutes, I kind of want to just very briefly touch on kind of this other big picture question. What's the impact of climate change on malaria or any vector-borne disease? Who thinks it's going to go up? Who thinks it's going to go down? So it's okay to think that it's going to go up because that's what everybody tells us, but it's actually a really nuanced view. And so this plot that I made, so that's why it's ugly, is basically plotting temperature anomalies relative to the 20th century average in green versus malaria deaths in red. So the way that I like to think of this is that the best 20 years for malaria have been the last 20 years. The worst 20 years for climate change have been the last 20 years. And so it turns out there's actually no consensus on what the future holds. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Principally, we just don't have the data. We make these really simplistic assumptions of like, well, we can imagine what the temperature is going to look like, and we know what temperature thresholds mosquitoes like, and therefore, if the temperature is more in line, things will be bad. And some of that may be true, right? We very well may see expansion of certain vector-borne diseases into the United States where they weren't before. We're seeing malaria transmission at higher elevations. Say in Western Kenya, this was work that was done 20 years ago to kind of really get that ball rolling. But this still bothers me because we're trying to make these forecasts, and some of my partners at Ministries of Health and other research centers are trying to make these projections about what's going to happen. And I don't think we know how to do it yet. And so this is just a plug that I'm recruiting a postdoc to help me work on this. And in fact, the Center for Climate Change and Health Equity is recruiting 3 postdocs. The search is currently underway. Like, if you know anybody who's interested in working with me, they're going to be working on, machine learning or process-based climate modeling to develop historical and future climate scenarios, developing counterfactuals, and integrating them with a lot of kind of surveillance data and intervention data to estimate kind of climate attributable risk under concepts of deep uncertainty to try and understand what the future may hold. And so I just have a link to the job posting here. And with that, I have managed to hit exactly 30 minutes. And so I'll thank you. And I'm happy to take any questions, or I don't know if we end exactly at 1, but happy to chat. Thank you.
Hoping that there are questions there in the audience or online. Please unmute and ask. You can ask your question.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can have a question. So I see you have analyzed so many data related to the health and different diseases.
Mm-hmm.
So generally, are these types of data like confidential, or how do you usually get the data?
So it depends. A lot of the malaria surveillance data that we work with is publicly available or available through a request to a Ministry of Health. Some of it is, the Ministry of Health has access to individual level records by name, et cetera. We work with aggregated data, so case counts. We don't need to. The data that we collect ourselves is kind of controlled by, IRB and the usual suspects, and you have to, be an approved member of the team to be able to access those data, at least until we publish and we kind of make the data available online. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So with your work, I noticed that it can be a very challenging task to collect all the data samples across various regions in a survey kind of data. So before you pick a region, like before you decide which region to pick to make a survey upon, do you kind of run in any kind of algorithms, let's say Bayesian optimization, to see in which region we will get the most useful information?
So not exactly that, no. So the way that we picked our study sites in the Amazon in particular is because that's where most of the malaria was. And it was like, the ministries of health are trying to eliminate the disease. We know that cross-border mobility is a significant driver. And so that's how we kind of identified working across borders in a region where most of the transmission was moving across, or that was the hypothesis, and we're trying to test that. There's some stuff that we're doing in the climate and health space that is trying to look at kind of climate change trajectories regionally to guide where we might go do survey work. And, there are various reasons to do that. One, efficiency of field work, but also kind of, you can think of it as efficiency of estimators in a statistical equation where, you want to collect the right amount of data, not too much, not too little. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yes, I see you have the different. Maybe I can ask a question later. Okay, yeah. So I just want to say, it seems like you are working on different types of networks, and these networks are overlapping with each other.
Yes.
Have you tried to consider the interdependencies and the connections between these networks?
So we've thought about it. We just haven't done it yet because the data aren't fully collected and cleaned and stuff like that. So it's kind of, it's a problem to think about later. Is kind of the way I'm thinking about it. There's plenty of other challenges that are more immediate in the pipeline. Yeah, but that's a good thought.